come to this second telling of this story. And it begins to make sense to me because I think Jesus is absolutely right when he reminds the Pharisees it's a matter of what's driven by the heart. Because we know that when we are passionate in our hearts, when we're driven in our hearts, when we're excited and our hearts are full of life and love, then incredible things happen. We are at our best in loving one another and caring for one another and connecting and bonding from the heart and having that passion. And compassion flows from that as well. But we also know the reverse is true. Because we've experienced moments when we begin to wonder, what happened to the passion? What happened to the compassion? What happened to the love? We have human experiences where we're torn apart from one another, when we're separated from one another, when we're pushed from one another, when we really engage one another that causes us to be at that place where the passion and the drive and the love and the care is gone. And then we have to wonder, what happened? And so this word from Matthew approaches and comes to us at a place of saying, yes, Jesus is a Christ of compassion. And it's wonderful and interesting in the way this happens too, because remember, this thing starts with this particular feeding in chapter 15. The people are brought to Jesus' feet. The sick people are brought, lame people, those who need curing, those who need healing, those who need help, are all brought to Jesus' feet. And he looks at them and he has compassion. And he has compassion not just to heal their hurts, but he has compassion to feed them. So Jesus does the same thing in chapter 15 as we see in chapter 14. Without criticism or debate or without any judging, he feeds them physically and he feeds them spiritually. And yes, there are some who are confused like the disciples. I believe maybe the disciples still had some degree of compassion, but I think they got it confused. They got confused first in thinking, there is not enough. Now, folks, I have to tell you, it's a dangerous thing when your faith brings you to the place of saying, God does not provide enough. That's not the nature of God. That's not the design of God's will. When you start applying that not enough thing to your faith and to God and to all of what God is doing, then you're probably getting it kind of mixed up. Let me say that same thing a different way. I believe that it's probably a common experience for any of us who has a checkbook to look at it sometimes another and say, I'm sorry, there's not enough. And then we somehow start applying that in other places, like our faith life and our belief system. There's not enough. Well, you understand what I'm saying. The truth is, sometimes we start applying that in the church, don't we? We start saying, there's not enough. And here we have in the scripture, Jesus showing us God always provides enough. It may be us who gets to that place of thinking there's scarcity. And that's also why I like the scripture verse that we're using this month for our stewardship. And this word from 2 Corinthians, where it says it's a matter of your abundance. Now maybe you don't always see your scarcity as abundance. But there's a wonderful message here where there's a reminder. There's a reminder that what we think is not enough, oh yes, God can do something with it. And God has. We may see what we have as scarcity, and then we don't see ourselves as blessed, truly blessed. But what God is doing is actually providing. This word in chapter 15 of Matthew is one in which Jesus says to his disciples, I have compassion for them. We're going to feed them. And then just like in chapter 14, where we see the feeding of the 5,000, and these people are brought to Jesus' feet, and he decides he's going to feed them, and there's no criticism, the common thing that happens in 14 and 15 is that in chapter 14 in the feeding, the people who come aren't judged. Nobody judges them. Jesus doesn't judge them. It's not a matter of saying the good people can eat and the bad people should starve. That doesn't happen in chapter 14. And in chapter 15, the thing that's worth noting is the saints and the sinners both eat together. I hope we don't miss that when we read these words in chapter 15. The saints and the sinners are sitting side by side. Jesus doesn't separate them out when he's feeding them. He doesn't say, oh, you good church folk, you're the ones on this side. today. And you people on this side, no, no, no. You will starve today. In this feeding, the men and the women and the children, the saints and the sinners, the good people and the bad people, the faithful people and the faithless people all eat together. You know why that's so important? It's important because sometimes in the church, we really do get a little twisted. Sometimes in the church, what we end up thinking is, we look out and we see, and we end up judging instead of showing compassion. Sometimes that's what happens, folks. Sometimes that thing doesn't kick in where it says, look at the log in your own eye, or the speck in your own eye before you see the log in someone else's. Sometimes that thing kicks in, and we start doing some judging of folk instead of some compassion with folk. Sometimes we start doing that separating out. And we got to make sure we don't get that twisted, because the reality, folks, is this. The church is not designed exclusively for the saints. Now, if it is, I'm in the wrong house of God, I got to tell you. If the church is designed only for those people who are good and righteous, I confess I'm in the wrong place. Because I come to church because I'm still a broken person. I still have needs. I still have hurts. I still have desires. I've said it before, I'll say it again this way. Pastor Ted still doesn't walk on water yet, folks. I got a stroke just like the rest of you. I don't walk on water. And the church is for the saints and the sinners. And just like in Matthew 15, we sit side by side and we eat. I look at it this way. All those broken people were brought to Jesus' feet. And he looked at them and he had compassion. When I hear that, do you want to know what I hear? Thanks for asking. What I hear is all those people were at Register Chapel